Chapter 10. United Order. Come out of Babylon. One of the most noticeable differences between Mormonism and other religions is the close relationship between the spiritual and the temporal. Mormonism is not just another ethereal, mystic, or philosophical religious system, but rather a practical, down-to-earth religion that can deal with dollars and cents, butter and beans, parcels of real estate, or heavenly kingdoms, because a religion that cannot help people temporally has little power to help them spiritually. Mormonism embraces both practicality and spirituality. In a doctoral dissertation by Dean D. McBrien, it was noted that in 112 revelations to Joseph Smith, 88 dealt in part or wholly with economic matters. This is not out of harmony with the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, for one verse in every 6 deals with the money question. Out of the 29 parables of Christ, 16 of them mention the Christian and his money. It is not riches alone, but the lust for riches that overcomes the human will. The love of money is the root of all evil. I. Tim. 6:10. So when men idolize riches, they often condescend to evil means to obtain them. A major mission for the Latter-day Saints is not only to teach, but to live an example of correct spiritual and temporal principles. Nearly every law of God has become foreign to our society, and if men do not rise up to protect themselves from the evil schemes and financial messes of the world, they must suffer the fate of Babylon when she falls. If we live according to the traditions, customs, and regulations of a Gentile society, how can we expect to gain a different reward? President John Taylor described our corrupt society by saying, "The fact of the matter is, we are all of us on the highway to financial or temporal ruin. The world is going to the devil just as fast as it can go. Corruption, fraud, chicanery, deception, evil and iniquity of every kind prevail, so that you cannot trust a man in any place, you cannot rely upon his word, you cannot rely upon any instrument of writing that he gets up, and there is nothing you can rely upon. We, as a people, have come out from Babylon, but we have brought a great amount of these infernal principles with us, and we have been grabbing, grasping, pinching, squeezing, hauling, horning and hooking on every side, and it seems as though every man was for himself and the devil for us all. That is about the position we are in today. We want a change in these things." J.D. 1749. Scriptural examples. How do saints get out of this frantic, wicked and idiotic system of seeking for wealth? It is necessary to refer to the scriptures for the answer to our temporal as well as spiritual problems. In the first book of the Bible, there is an excellent example of a people who had temporal and spiritual success. Thus Enoch, the seventh from Adam, instituted an order of things among his people, in their business and financial relations, which so revolutionized their temporalities, that they had no poor among them, and all rejoiced together in equal hope of the life and exaltation offered to them in the gospel of Jesus Christ, the only begotten of the Father. Compendium, Richards and Little, page 264. This was a doctrine of Christ and was also established in the New Testament. And the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and of one soul. Neither said any of them that aught of the things which he possessed was his own, but they had all things common. Neither was there any among them that lacked. For as many as were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the prices of the things that were sold, and laid them down at the apostles' feet. And distribution was made unto every man according as he had need. Acts 4:32, 34, 35. This is a clear description of the gospel of Christ functioning in the temporal affairs of the Christians. From this graphic illustration, it is evident by comparison that the 1,000 contending Christian churches of today do not practice the gospel of Christ. For an extended period of time, Christ taught the Nephites personally, and gave them his commandments. After receiving these teachings directly from the Lord, they taught, and did minister one to another, and they had all things common among them, every man dealing justly, one with another. 3 Nephi 26:19. The work of their missionaries extended to every portion of the land and to every class of people. It was a magnificent missionary effort, and the results were astounding. The people were all converted unto the Lord, upon all the face of the land, both Nephites and Lamanites, and there were no contentions and disputations among them, and every man did deal justly one with another. And they had all things common among them, therefore there were not rich and poor, bond and free, but they were all made free, and partakers of the heavenly gift. 4 Nephi 2-3. The United Order in operation. Before going into the history of the United Order in this dispensation, let's try to get a better understanding of this process whereby men consecrated themselves and their goods. We can take a walk through as though we were doing it ourselves. A man gives to the bishop, or designated authority, all that he has, as a consecration or sacrifice to the Lord. The bishop then considers the talents, gifts and abilities of the man, and designates a stewardship for him to manage. He may receive more or less than he consecrated. His stewardship will most likely be coordinated with his profession of mason, carpenter, farmer, etc. The Lord says that the bishop should give to people their portions, every man equal according to his family, according to his circumstances and his wants and needs. D&C 51:3. Let's consider how this applies to different people, every man receiving 1. Equal according to his family. A single man would naturally require only 1/10 the amount of food, clothes, etc., than a man would with 10 in his family, yet it would be an equal portion. 2. Equal according to his circumstances. If the order is blessed with great wealth, then they all share equally the same good fortune of their circumstances. If they are in an order that is poor, then they all share equally those circumstances or conditions. 3. Equal according to his wants. A man who is a farmer would want a tractor, plow, harrow, truck, and other farm equipment. A carpenter would want saws, planers, lathes, etc. Though each man would want different things, they would be equal in their wants or needs for their stewardships. 4. Equal according to his needs. Some may need a wheelchair or glasses, more blankets or books for education, etc. Each would be getting different items, but equal according to their needs. Neither the bishop nor anyone else had complete say as to how everything should be done. The Lord had said that all these things were to be done by common consent. D&C 26:2. This was the Lord's method of preventing priestcraft. Nothing was spent, given, or taken, except by the common consent of the order, either by the individuals themselves or through their elected officers. And there shall not any part of it be used, or taken out of the treasury, only by the voice and common consent of the order. D&C 104:71. The moment some people receive community funds without the consent of the people, it either becomes a priestcraft or a dictatorship. The Lord calls this distribution of wealth the law of my gospel. D&C 104:18. This was considered to be another spiritual law, just as any other laws of the gospel. This system was not only a law and a protection, with spiritual blessings accompanying it, but it was a very practical program. 10 farms united would need only a couple of tractors instead of 10. The same would apply to tools, trucks, and everything else right down to the breakfast table, said Brigham Young. Instead of each one of 100 women getting up in the morning to cook breakfast for father and the large boys, that they may go to their labor, while the little children are crying and needing attention, breakfast for the whole can be prepared by 5 or 10 women, with a man or two to help. J.D. 1744. United Order in our dispensation. Bible scholars and preachers have all recognized that extreme wealth and extreme poverty are a social injustice and also a moral sin. By the year 1830 there were many communes or social organizations trying to establish some sort of common property arrangement. Most of these creations had already failed or were about to. Now the Mormons would have a chance. But a cooperative society in which things are shared in common requires many to surrender the control of their purse strings. This is a tender spot for man. Some men will put their eternal destiny into the arm of flesh, with a recklessness that would astound dictators, but when their pocketbooks are to be assessed, they speedily retreat. In 1830 the Lord proposed to give this commandment of all things in common to the Mormons. Within a few months the Lord revealed. But it is not given that one man should possess that which is above another, wherefore the world lieth in sin. D&C 49:20. For if ye are not equal in earthly things, ye cannot be equal in obtaining heavenly things. D&C 78:6. The Lord gave revelations, and the prophet Joseph conveyed to the saints these instructions on living the united order. So it began in the early stages of the church in Kirtland, Ohio. However, many of the saints in Kirtland were not able to keep those covenants and stewardships, because of their lust for personal wealth. George A. Smith explained. I moved into Kirtland with 5 families. The question immediately arose, where shall we settle? Why, right here in Kirtland. The Lord designs to make this a stronghold for a few years, and here we are to settle, which was the counsel of the prophet. The very first thing that occurred after this advice was that 2 out of the 5 came to the conclusion that they had better go to the neighboring town, because they thought they could gain some temporary advantage. To Chagrin they went, in opposition to the advice of the prophet, and in a few weeks they were in darkness, and not long after, they were numbered with the enemies of Zion, and were soon using all their power for the destruction of the saints. He that gathereth not with us scattereth abroad. Joseph, the prophet, told us to go to work and build up the cities of Zion, and not to build up strange cities. J.D. 12:150. This personal lust for wealth could affect both church members and leaders alike. Brigham Young recalled. When the 12 apostles were chosen in this dispensation, they were told not to labor with their hands, but to preach the gospel to the nations of the earth. Some of them, before a year had elapsed, were engaged in trade, they became merchants, and they apostatized. Mill. Star 3626. Thus, on April 10, 1834, the United Order of Kirtland was dissolved. Yet, only 13 days later the Lord gave a revelation to Joseph Smith concerning the Order of Enoch. CD&C Sec. 104. The whole revelation was devoted to this United Order effort. The Lord seemed determined to have this principle live, even if most of the people didn't. It began by saying, Verily I say unto you, my friends, I give unto you counsel, and a commandment, concerning all the properties which belong to the order which I commanded to be organized and established, to be a united order, and an everlasting order for the benefit of my church, and for the salvation of men until I come. D&C 104:1. Speculation took hold of the people in America and the saints were not exempt. By 1837 the country and the saints experienced financial chaos. Elder B.H. Roberts summarized the reason for the great apostasy and failure of the saints in Kirtland. They had entered into that spirit of reckless speculation which for several years had been rife throughout the United States, and which expressed itself chiefly in land speculation and in excessive banking, culminating in the disastrous financial panic of 1837. CHC 1398. The result of the financial panic was that millions of dollars throughout the area were lost, and the sheriff was a frequent visitor at Kirtland, and mortgage foreclosures followed each other in surprising frequency. CHC 1407, Kirtland became uprooted, and apostasy reached its highest point during these times. If the saints had adhered to the laws of consecration, as the Lord had commanded in 1831, the catastrophe of 1837 could have been avoided. While the saints in Kirtland were attempting to live a united order, the Lord gave a revelation concerning a land of promise, which would have no curse when the Lord cometh. The place had not been revealed, but if they would gather to Ohio, they would be informed of the sign. Later, it was revealed that the New Jerusalem or Holy City, the capital of the government of God, would be located in Jackson County, Missouri. The Lord also revealed that the sign could not be established, except by obedience to the law of consecration. See D&C 5835-36. Another united order was attempted in Missouri, and the prophet dedicated the site for the Temple of the New Jerusalem at Independence. See D&C 84-2-4. With land so cheap, and with so many Mormons moving onto the land, making it more valuable, many of the saints took advantage of the old Gentile philosophy to buy cheap and sell high. They were motivated by the temporal profit rather than gaining an eternal inheritance. The Lord saw this and warned them that the rebellious shall be cut off out of the land of Zion, and shall be sent away, and shall not inherit the land, D&C 64:35, because he decreed that my law shall be kept on this land. D&C 58:19, the prophet Joseph Smith wrote a letter to the saints in Missouri, and warned them also that If Zion will not purify herself, so as to be approved of in all things, in his sight, he will seek another people, for his work will go on until Israel is gathered, and they who will not hear his voice, must expect to feel his wrath. DHC 1316. All of this was given as warning to the saints at a time when everything was peaceful in Jackson County, Missouri. The saints were greedy after the temporal things, and within 2.5 years of their settling in the land of Zion, the words of these prophecies were fulfilled. Since the saints failed to keep the law of united order, they suffered the consequences, and the Lord chastised them. Behold, they have not learned to be obedient to the things which I required at their hands, but are full of all manner of evil, and do not impart of their substance, as becometh saints, to the poor and afflicted among them, and are not united according to the union required by the law of the celestial kingdom. D&C 105:3-4. The saints were their own worst enemy. Because of their own weaknesses and faults, the Lord allowed them to suffer the persecution and plundering that resulted in Missouri. Elder George A. Smith reported. The settlements in Jackson County were commenced on the principle of the law of consecration. There were, however, at that period, professed Latter-day Saints, who did not see proper to abide by this law of consecration. They thought it was their privilege to look after number one, and some of them, believing that Zion was to become a very great city, and that being the center stake of it, they purchased tracts of land in the vicinity, with the intention of keeping them until Zion became the beauty and joy of the whole earth, when they thought they could sell their lands and make themselves very rich. It was probably owing to this, in part, that the Lord suffered the enemies of Zion to rise against her. J.D. 1759. The Missourians rose up against the Mormons and burned out 203 Mormon homes, and burned or destroyed many grain fields and granaries. They ripped out fences, tore down their printing office and other businesses, whipped, beat and raped the Mormons. Over $318,000 had been paid for land in Missouri, but all of it was lost to the mobs. The prophet Joseph Smith gave a speech at Far West, which was not only a warning to the saints then, but a prophetic warning to the saints in our day. Brethren, we are gathered to this beautiful land to build up Zion. But since I have been here I have perceived the spirit of selfishness. Covetousness exists in the hearts of the saints. Here are those beginning to spread out, buying up all the land they are able to thinking to lay a foundation for themselves, only looking to their individual families. Now I want to tell you that Zion cannot be built up in such a way. I see signs put out, beer signs, speculative schemes are being introduced. This is the way of the world, Babylon indeed, and I tell you in the name of the God of Israel, if there is not repentance, you will be broken and scattered from this land. Edward Stevenson Autobiography, page 40. The Lord himself warned the saints. Zion cannot be built up unless it is by the principles of the law of the celestial kingdom, otherwise I cannot receive her unto myself. And my people must needs be chastened until they learn obedience, if it needs be, by the things which they suffer. D&C 105. 5-6. Persecutions continued in Far West, and the Mormons were driven out again, leaving nearly $500,000 in property and goods. In January of 1839, the saints left for Illinois to make another settlement. However, for the next several years the saints were unable to re-establish the united order. Because the saints failed to keep the commandments of the Lord, they were forced more than once to leave their homes, their lands and their temples. Soon they even had to leave the boundaries of the United States to wander in the desert wilderness to try again to live the gospel, the way the Lord had revealed it. The barren wilderness of Utah was a means of purification. Those who wanted to live in a better climate, more prosperous conditions, with an easier means of livelihood, were quick to leave this desert oasis. Some headed for the gold fields of California, others sold their possessions and joined the numerous caravans heading for the west coast. After 20 years in the desert, a successful effort in getting the people into the order came with the establishment of a mercantile cooperative. In 1868, the first steps were taken towards Zion's cooperative mercantile institution, and branches of the cooperative were established in many of the settlements as stock companies. Everyone was given the opportunity to buy stock with cash, produce, or labor. Business was booming for the new ZCMI, but it was a death blow to many of the other merchants, including some of the Mormon stores. But Brigham said the cooperative and the United Order would serve a better purpose. Henceforth it must be to let this trade alone, and save our means for other purposes, than to enrich outsiders. We must use it to spread the gospel, to gather the poor, build temples, sustain our poor, build houses for ourselves, and convert this means to a better use, than to give it to those who will use it against us. JD 12-301. Bitter conflict grew between the Mormons and non-Mormons during the 1860s and 1870s. The government now took the position that mobs had formerly taken. Not only did they send a whole army out west to put down the Mormons, but they began to hatch up numerous and unconstitutional laws to persecute, religiously uproot, and economically destroy the Mormon people. These were the forces and conditions that drove the Mormon people into an economic independence and the birth of the United Order again among its people. Another event that helped the germination of the order was the Great National Panic and Depression of 1873. In 1872, Brigham Young delivered a sermon in which he may have been referring to this imminent depression. If Babylon should happen to tip over, so that we could not reach out and gather the necessaries of life, we should be in a bad condition. I want to put you in mind of these things, and it is my duty to say to the Latter-day Saints, that they should take measures to sustain themselves. They should lay a foundation for feeding and clothing themselves. JD 15-158. Within a year after this sermon, Babylon did tip over. This national depression hit the United States and reached its bottom by 1875, and didn't turn around until 1879. It was during these 6 years that people all over the country were trying to find ways of financial relief. On January 11, 1874, Brigham Young began to take active measures for establishing the United Order among the Mormons. At a meeting in the home of Erastus Snow in St. George, Robert Gardner gathered a list of about a dozen names of people who were willing to enter the order. Brigham said it was enough for a start. On February 9, Gardner was set apart as president of the new order, and on February 15, in a general meeting, Young told them it was time for all the saints to enter into that law. This was the beginning of a major change in the church, resulting in at least 220 different United Orders. See Building the City of God, Arrington, Fox, and May, pages 414-419. Brigham Young said he had been instructed by the Lord to establish the United Order among the saints. Thus saith the Lord unto my servant Brigham, call ye, upon the inhabitants of Zion, to organize themselves in the order of Enoch, in the new and everlasting covenant, according to the order of heaven, for the furtherance of my kingdom upon the earth, for the perfecting of the saints, for the salvation of the living and the dead. You can accommodate yourselves by calling this a new revelation, if you choose. It is no new revelation, but it is the express word and will of God to this people. J.D. 17-154, 1874. The central theme of their preaching was both spiritual and temporal. The saints were told to be self-sustaining and not import or buy anything that they could make themselves. They were not to have any poor among them. Everyone could labor in some way. The Order of Enoch spread in Utah, Wyoming, and Idaho to include the towns of Bear Lake, Montpelier, Paris, Liberty, Ovid, Bloomington, St. Charles, Fish Haven, Lake Town, Woodruff, Randolph, Ammi, Malad, Clarkston, Mantua, and many others. But every order had its time of trouble and sorrow. The strain of management, or else weaknesses in the members themselves, were too severe for most of the orders. All of them were operating with different degrees of success or failure. Some members had gone into it with a complete consecration, others still had private interests and businesses. Some consecrated all their time to the order, while others were only half into it. Part of the members wanted money for their wages. Some drew all of their credits out as soon as they earned them, while a few took only the very essentials to exist. Of the 220-plus different United Orders that were started, only a small number were successful for more than a few years. It has been estimated that during the first year of the organization of these orders, nearly half of them were unsuccessful. There was nothing wrong with the system, the problem was with the people. Some were happy and successful in it, but others were disgruntled and dissatisfied. Brigham explained how this economic system of United Order could become a profitable one if it were operated correctly. I know how to start such a society, right in this city, and how to make its members rich. Would you like to know how to do this? I can tell you in a very few words: never want a thing you cannot get, live within your means, manufacture that which you wear, and raise that which you eat. Raise every calf and lamb, raise the chickens, and have your eggs, make your butter and cheese, and always have a little to spare. The first year we raise a crop, and we have more than we want. We buy nothing, we sell a little. The next year we raise more, we buy nothing, and we sell more. In this way we could pile up the gold and silver, and in 20 years 100 families working like this could buy out their neighbors. J.D. 1611. Continuing, he gave an insight into the importance of this system, and what would happen if it were not perpetuated. Zion is the pure in heart. Zion cannot be built up except on the principles of union required by the celestial law. It is high time for us to enter into these things. It is more pleasant and agreeable for the Latter-day Saints to enter into this work and build up Zion, than to build up ourselves and have this great competition which is destroying us. Now let things go on in our midst in our Gentile fashion, and you would see an aristocracy growing amongst us. You would have classes established here, some very poor and some very rich. Now, the Lord is not going to have anything of that kind. J.D. 19:349. A correspondent from the Salt Lake Herald visited the Brigham City United Order and wrote a brief synopsis, which leaves a nostalgic glimpse of the past and of what might have been. If the example of the inhabitants of this town was more generally followed, Utah would be far more prosperous and her people much better off. Our present suicidal policy of exporting raw materials and importing manufactured articles would be stopped. We would be far more independent of our sister states and territories. The financial panics of the East or West would not affect us. Our people would all have good homes and enjoy more of the comforts of life than they can hope for under present regulations. And our children would stand a much better chance of receiving good educations and becoming useful members of society. Salt Lake Herald, October 25, 1876. The most successful order was the one in Orderville. That community never felt the economic fluctuations on the money markets, nor the effects of the Depression, for they were almost totally self-sustaining. They had their own meat, eggs, cheese, soap, coal, lumber, milk, silk, wool, cotton, and leather products. In addition, they were able to furnish material and labor in the building of the St. George and Manti temples, and they also sent out missionaries. Eventually, there came a time when those living in Orderville were better dressed and better fed than any of their neighbors. During the Depression of the late 1870s and early 1880s, many people sought to join the Orderville community. There were those who joined but would not work, and some who soon withdrew from the order, both of whom caused trouble. From order to disorder. The last members of the Orderville Board of Directors remained until July 14, 1900. The order was still financially independent when it was disorganized, and negotiations were even underway at this time for the purchase of several cotton mills. However, it was not the weakness of members, difficulty of internal practices or stringent rules, that caused the order its greatest trouble. It was the federal government. The Edmunds Act in 1885 induced fines and imprisonment for polygamists for unlawful cohabitation, causing many to leave for the underground. Some of the men were apprehended and sent to prison, including the president of Orderville, Thomas Chamberlain. And along with the government, it was also some of the LDS church leaders that finally disbanded the order. Many of the families in Orderville were plural, and to escape from U.S. Marshals who were enforcing the Edmunds Act, many men went into hiding. Some were caught and sentenced to prison. Apostle Lyman advised the citizens to discontinue the order. Orderly Orderville, Nick Carling, The Trolley Times, page 2. Because of the Edmunds-Tucker law, the government was legally stealing Mormon church land. Some of the leaders were more willing to capitulate with their enemies than to stand up for their rights. It was during this confusion of what was right and what was wrong that the church authorities sent John R. Young, Brigham's first son, to dissolve the order. He couldn't convince them to dissolve, so they had to send another man to do it. Day. News, September 4, 1974, B3. The apostles Brigham Young Jr. and Heber J. Grant also came to recommend that the order disband, so that they could make peace with the government. Gradually each piece of property, equipment and livestock was transferred, sold or deeded. It was not until 1900 that the last item, the incorporated order, was phased out of existence. The cooperative spirit was soon replaced by the competitive spirit. Money schemes, financiering, and all that goes with modern merchandising became incorporated with the Mormon economic system. United order among the Mormons would become a relic of the past with little more value than their handcarts, muskets, and prairie schooners. The United order was once the law of the Lord to a people making attempts to practice it. Now it merely gathers dust and books upon the shelves of pioneer history. A necessary order to redeem Zion. Inequality is a sin, not only to the Latter-day Saints, but also to the world, and Brigham Young said, the Latter-day Saints will never accomplish their mission until this inequality shall cease on the earth. J.D. 1947. It is a sad commentary to realize that the Saints have not been able to divert the Gentiles from the inequality of their money, but rather the Gentiles have been able to divert the Mormons from the equality of theirs. In one of the last revelations to the church concerning this order of Enoch, the Lord said, Behold, I say unto you, were it not for the transgressions of my people, speaking concerning the church and not individuals, they might have been redeemed even now. But, behold, they have not learned to be obedient to the things which I required at their hands, but are full of all manner of evil, and do not impart of their substance, as becometh saints. To the poor and afflicted among them, men are not united according to the union required by the law of the celestial kingdom, and Zion cannot be built up unless it is by the principles of the law of the celestial kingdom, otherwise I cannot receive her unto myself. D&C 105 2-5. That problem among the saints has not been resolved even to the present day. To summarize: 1. Having all things in common was a doctrine attempted, or practiced, by all true saints since the beginning of recorded history. 2. The United Order was practiced for a while in Kirtland and Independence. However, its failure resulted in the expulsion of the saints. It was not re-established in Illinois, nor for about 20 years after the saints arrived in Utah. 3. A few orders begun under the leadership of Brigham Young had some success, i.e., Brigham City and Orderville, but they were gradually discontinued because of pressure from the U.S. government, the LDS Church, or because of disunity among the people themselves. 4. God commanded the saints to be organized by a bond or everlasting covenant that cannot be broken, D&C 78:11, but they were unsuccessful in their efforts. The United Order is an everlasting order. D&C 104:1. 5. For the last century, no attempt by the LDS Church has been made to re-establish the United Order. 6. Today the saints are taught and are practicing the principles of Babylon by pinching, grasping, hooking, cheating and every other deception to get rich. 7. Zion cannot be established except through the law of consecration. See D&C 58:35-36.